This is a video of homemade sanding blocks intended for woodworking, and I use these for final sanding or finish sanding in between coats of spray or paint, and then also for kind of areas where I just can't reach with a orbital sander. I like to use the orbital sander wherever possible because it's a lot quicker and it can be just as good as a sanding block if you're careful with it. Block design has some advantages over the standard rubber sanding block and also the sponge block, which I don't have a sample of that. I want to just go through some of those trade-offs and see what you guys think. The first one is the size. I wanted to come up with something that was quite a bit smaller than the standard sanding blocks to reach into areas where these guys just won't work. Otherwise, you know, if I can if I can use a standard sanding block, you know, it's most of the time I can use the orbital sander, you know, so this guy's intended to fit where I just can't use orbital sander. And the dimensions here are 1 inch by 1 inch, and I did that. Also, this dimension right here is 4.5 inches. I made this this size because it actually works pretty well with 1/6 of a standard sandpaper sheet, which is 11 inches long by 9 inches wide. And what you end up doing is just a full sheet here. Is you take a full sheet and you'll divide it up into thirds and, you know, fold it. I'm not going to do it with this one, but I'll just show you the process. You fold it in thirds first, and then you'll fold it in half like this ways, and then you'll end up with sections like right here that are this is already folded, and you just cut those sheets out with like an X-Acto knife or utility knife, just like you would do for one of these type of blocks. And you'll end up with these sheets that are the 4.5 inches long by 3 2/3 inches wide. No measurements or anything like that. It's just, you know, folding it. You know, so it makes it pretty quick and easy to get these sheets. Once you get the sheets, it's a pretty quick process to get them added to this. So, by the way, even though this sanding block is smaller, the actual square inches of the sanding material is more than with this rubber block. So if I go like this and just kind of show that right there, you can see that there's quite a bit more square inches on this sanding block than this guy. So in theory, this guy is going to last at least as long as this guy before you need to swap out the sanding paper, because you can, like, say, if you want to start sanding like this, you can flip it over and then sand this surface, and then flip it over again and get that surface. You know, so it's not like you're going to be swapping out the sandpaper a lot more often. Like, so sanding surfaces, this is a pretty big one. That if you look at these rubber sanding blocks, it's really only one surface that can be sanded. That's this surface right here. If you talk about like the sponge sanders, those guys can do 2 surfaces just like this guy. So that would be used for if you have like an inside corner of I don't know, a project, and you know, you could come in with this sanding block like this and sand both surfaces of the inside corner at the same time. It's also useful for if you want to try and sand away excess glue in a joint on an inside corner. So that's an added feature that you can do with this guy that you can also do with the sponge, but you can't do with this rubber sanding block. And let's see, so flatness. Okay, so here's the sanding block without the sandpaper, and you've got just a flat surface right here. This is the base part, by the way. This is a clamp part right here, and then you've got 2 nut knobs that are used to clamp down on the sandpaper. You've got 1/4 inch hex bolt and a nut that's embedded in the nut knob. That's what's used to cinch down on the sandpaper. And so this is all just wood. It happens to be maple, although you could use any type of wood you wanted. This is a bit different than both the sponge and the rubber blocks, in that those guys are flexible. You know, they kind of give and take, and those are more for rough sanding of surfaces to kind of try and smooth out the high spots and the low spots. Whereas this is more of kind of like a, I would think, for finishing sanding, or for cases where you want to have very sharp edges. Like, so you have two mitered edges that come together and you want to have a nice sharp edge there. This is going to do a much better job than something like these guys are the sponge sanders. Cost is probably a big factor for most people. The sponge sanders are going to be the most expensive, right? Because you use them once and then you got to throw them away. I was looking at the prices, and the cheap ones are about $2.50 each. The more expensive ones, where I was looking, were more like about $4.50. So you know, that's quite a bit of expense every time you have to throw one of those away. The rubber sanding block uses the same sheet sandpaper, but you've got an initial investment. These guys are like $4 a piece, I think. And if you want to have multiple sanding blocks for each of the grits that you want to use, that can add up when you're using this type of blocks. So then you're left with this guy here, which I figure this is about 40 cents of material. Most of that is the hex bolt and the nuts. And I used, this is really just scrap maple that I used, so, but I did add a little bit of cost for the wood itself. And then from the sandpaper standpoint, since these little squares are 1/6 of a standard sheet, I calculated out that these are about 17 cents each once you cut them out. So the total is about 57 cents for this, so that makes it the lowest cost option. Weight-wise, the sponge sand blocks are probably the lightest for their size. This is a close second. It's pretty light. It's about 1/3 the weight of this guy, which is pretty heavy. And you know, they're all pretty light when you think about it. But if you're sanding for an extended period of time, half hour, an hour, or whatever, any sort of weight difference is gonna affect your fatigue of your hands or your fingers or something like that. So it's I tried to make a small improvement with this concept here, where I drilled out this area right here, and it's just extra weight, that doesn't do anything for structure or anything like that. I think one of the big improvements that I could have done is that now I have a process for making wooden bolts and nuts, I could make these again and use wood for these guys. I think that's going to really cut down on the weight, and likely it's actually going to be easier than using the metal bolts and nuts. When I made these, the most of the time was spent just embedding, like say this bolt, because you've got to cut out or sand out or chisel out the pattern for the hex bolt, embed it in there. Same thing with these nuts. Whereas if I'm going to use wooden nuts and bolts, what I do is I just cut out this disc, drill a hole, and then tap that hole in the wood, and that would be the nut side. And then over here, I just drill a straight hole, use a dowel that protrudes through, and then thread just the end of the dowel to mate up with the nut knob. Another little improvement with using the wood bolts would be that you can kind of, I don't know if you can see it, but these metal bolts are recessed inward slightly. I tried to get them as flush as I could with this outside surface, but they are recessed in. I don't think it's going to affect how these sand. It really hasn't been affecting how these sand. But with the wooden bolts, I could make those flush, totally flush. And ergonomics wise, I kind of favor this design over, certainly over this, because this guy, what I find is I'm just using my fingertips, so that's what gets tired, is fingertips. The sponge sanding blocks are better, are a bit better. These guys I think are, I think they work pretty good for me because I'm able to grip the sanding block with more of my fingers, and also I can put this nut knob right at the palm of my hand right here if I'm holding it in this orientation, so it's pretty comfortable there. There's also another way to hold it like this, which is not bad either for light work. And then so another one is sandpaper replacement. If anybody's used these guys, you know it's a hassle to replace the sandpaper. It's not easy to get it lined up and to get the sandpaper tight, and then also because that uses nails to hold it, that eventually the sandpaper starts to loosen up, which opens up the possibility for snagging on these edges on either side, which will lead to tearing of the paper. Whereas like on the sponge blocks, they're the best, right? Because you don't ever replace the sandpaper. But with this design, it's actually pretty easy. What you do to get it off there is you just loosen up the two nut knobs, and then this paper will slide off like that right there. And then once you've got the squares cut out to the size that you need, there's a couple ways that you can preform the pattern needed to slide it back on there. One is you can just take the nut knobs off here, and then the clamp bar, and then start wrapping the sandpaper square around this base part. You can start by lining up the sandpaper with the two bolts, and then on the ends, and then start creasing it, folding it around as you go all the way around, and then do that final one. Now what I'll do is take it off and then add another crease after the fact. It only just takes a couple seconds, but it does kind of clean up the folds pretty good, you know. And then from that point on you reinstall the bolt or the clamp here. I got numbers on the clamp that show me how to reinstall that the same way every time. You add the nut knobs back on there, but you don't tighten them down all the way. Just add them just so they get started, and then it's a matter of just sliding on the preformed square. It just goes on like that. It's that easy. Way better than the rubber sanding block when you're done. So the other method is you take whatever this base size you have, which is 1 by 1 inch for this example, and you have a little scrap piece of wood that's also 1 inch by 1 inch. But what you could do is cut it back just a little bit. Like I cut this guy back by about a 64th of an inch. And what that does is when you wrap the paper around in the same method that I used, you end up with folds that are just slightly smaller than if you would wrap it around the sanding block itself. So it gives you a little bit tighter of a fit, and it's actually just a little bit quicker also. Although just doing it off this block is really easy. And what I do is I will cut up a full sheet into the 6 squares and just pre-fold those 6 sandpapers and just have them off to the side so that I can swap them out real quick and easy. That's the most efficient way to do it. Some other negatives with this rubber sanding block are that it's pretty inefficient for use of the sandpaper. Like the way you'd cut paper out for this block is like this, or widthwise. So you end up with this area here and here that are waste. Or you can, what I do is, what I did in the past was just use this for hand sanding, but it's still kind of an inefficient way. With this one, you can limit the amount of wasted or unused sandpaper, and it's really just this area right here and here. You could make that less wide by changing the size of the base part. You don't need it to be that wide. I did that just because that's how it turned out, and it's fine. I'm fine with it. It's a lot better than this guy. There's no waste on the sponge sanding block. And the last little comment would be that something annoying about these rubber sanding blocks is that over time it's real easy to rip them. I'm sure you guys have done that with these. You know, once they start to rip, it's over. You know, and that's just because you only have one edge here on each side. And like I said before, the sandpaper becomes looser and looser as you use it. And that's compared to this guy here, where the sandpaper wraps around like the sponge sanding blocks, and so it's much less likely to rip and be damaged. You can use any sanding grit that you want with these guys. I even have like this guy here, which is like 60 grit, which for areas that are really rough where you want, and yeah, small, but you want to get in there and you can't get to it with the orbital sander. So yeah, you can have multiple sanding blocks for any grit that you want. And I did make a really quick trade-off comparison between the different sanding block things, and I'll show that on the video. You might have to pause it though, because there's quite a bit of info there, but you can check that out. And I wanted to mention also that I do have a SketchUp CAD model for this with dimensions if you wanted to make this exact sanding block, or maybe you wanted the dimensions to scale it up or down to whatever size that might work good for you. I can post that out on the SketchUp CAD warehouse if you guys were interested in that. And if you have any improvements or comments about this video, feel free to bring them up. And if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel for more.